handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2 1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4 7 tree 9er 8 9er out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds HEBT. Gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. There are a few people on TV that I enjoy watching. And I have one of them with me right now, and that's Fox News's Janice Dean, the happiest weather machine in television history. I don't know how else to put it. You are more fun to watch with news and than with weather than I can think of. It's a joy. Just being in your company digitally, I guess. So thank you, Janice, for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience.
What a warm welcome, Denise. Thank you so much.
I'm pleased that you have come out with, I think this is your 5th book on the Frogcaster, right?
You got that right. This is the 5th one. We did a thunderstorm, we did a blizzard, we did a tornado, we did a hurricane, and this one is about a flash flood.
Well, here's a big question. Do the schools love you as much as we all do?
I got to say, I love talking to kids. I love going out and talking to kids about weather. Sometimes they shock me how much they know about weather, and they're so excited to tell me about the storm that they went through and when the power went out and what they did with their parents. And I always thought, geez, if I could tap into that excitement about weather, then we could do some educating. And that's what I wanted to do with these books, is come up with a fun character, Freddie the Frogcaster. He's a frog who loves predicting the weather, and his friends Sally Croker and Polly Woggins at the Frog News Network. They all love to warn people in advance, make sure they're prepared. And I just know when I go out to schools, teachers have told me they're so grateful that there are teaching tools out there like these books to help them with their lesson planning, because I think if we talk to our kids in advance of storms and tell them why they happen, I think it potentially takes the scare out of a dangerous situation. Weather can be really scary, that's for sure. But if you talk about it and talk about what you do with your kids, and if you have an emergency kit and who your neighbor is, if they have to call somebody, and how to contact your local authorities, what to do if you're at school if there's a weather emergency, if you talk to them in advance, it will make them more prepared and likely to, take it seriously and maybe not be as scared.
You're really doing, I would say, a dual track here, Janice. One is that, you're getting them certainly interested in science. And then I think from a school syllabus, you're kind of expanding and aiding, the teachers in a whole nother realm. And then they have to have a dialogue with their own parents too. So did you forecast, no pun intended, but did you forecast that your series of books was going to have this kind of service about it?
Listen, when I first wrote the first book, I had 2 things I wanted to accomplish. I wanted to write a fun story, 3 things. I wanted to write a fun story with a fun character. I wanted to have great illustrations that were beautiful and vibrant, and thankfully, Russ Cox is the best illustrator a girl could have. And then I also wanted to add some education to it. I wanted to get kids learning without them really knowing that they were learning. And And so far, it's been a wonderful experience. And so we're on the 5th book, and Freddie could have lots of adventures. There are so many weather adventures out there. There are so many other, if you go into the earth sciences. I mean, we just had an eclipse that blew my mind, Denise.
Oh, it did. I know.
And I thought to myself, Freddie the Frogcaster and the enormous eclipse. I mean, that's another thing that we could do. We could expand from the atmosphere and go into space. So I feel very grateful, more than anything, that the books have been received so well. And the greatest compliment you can give me as a parent or a teacher that have said, when they read the book, they want to get together with their parents and their family and make sure that they have an emergency kit, that kind of thing. So, listen, I'm just grateful, and I feel blessed.
Well, we're blessed. I don't have kids in the hunt anymore. Mine are adults, but we got generations and generations. But the cool thing is about your books, Janice, is that you're giving them tips. I mean, it isn't just about a story. There's a lot of other messaging that's going on. Was that all planned? Was that part of your mission?
Definitely. And I think the amazing part of these books, and listen, I had some help. I had the idea for the story. I have Russ, my wonderful illustrator. But I had, a good publisher that also knew what they were doing, Regnery Books, and they suggested that at the end of the book, at the back of the book, to have sort of a glossary of terms for kids that really want to get into the science, like almost like lesson planning, a checklist, tips on how to be safe and what to put in your emergency kit. So it acts as sort of an educational tool. You've got the story, and then 5 or 6 pages in the back of the book are devoted to the science behind why things happen. So I wish I could take the credit for coming up with that brilliant idea, but it was my editors and my publisher that decided, hey, let's do a dual purpose here. Let's give some bang for our buck, 2 for the price of 1, and that is a good story with educational material at the back of it.
Your target audience for kids is what necessarily age group?
Well, I think, anywhere from kindergarten to 3rd grade is probably a bullseye, but I've had kids younger than that love the illustrations. I mean, if you look at the book, Russ is a painter. I mean, this could be a coffee table book. It's so pretty.
Yes.
So I've had younger kids just look at it, and then as they get older and they start to read, they get a little bit more out of it. But I've also had parents tell me that they've learned things from it. Just the other day, someone told me, I had no idea that flooding was the most dangerous, life-threatening event that we have in weather, in that it takes more lives, unfortunately, per year than lightning, tornadoes, and hurricanes. So flooding is a major, major weather event that happens. And it also happens anywhere on the planet. I mean, if you have rain, you have the potential for flash flooding.
Well, and there's not exactly alarms out there. I mean, you've got alarms and whistles and sirens for tornadoes and whatnot, but you don't really have it for flooding. And so you've done, in this most recent book, you've done a huge service to, raise some real eyebrows. And, we're certainly grateful to that. I would also say that when you've got these younger kids and they necessarily read it, they're going to talk to their older brothers and sisters, their older siblings. And so I think kind of as a segue, you're reaching even middle schoolers or high schoolers because, little Johnny's going to ask his bigger sister, Jennifer, hey, what about this and what about that? And she's going to say, well, what are you talking about? And then all of a sudden you've got a bigger dialogue, right?
Listen, you're never too old to learn. That's my key. And since having children myself, I'll read books to my kids, and it's wonderful if you can say the book that you've just read to your kids can teach you something. So you're never too old to learn, and I'm hoping that kids of all ages will enjoy Freddie.
You mentioned Russ, your illustrator. I mean, the colors in the book books are so vibrant. They're so happy. They're so cheery that it's almost, as a kid, I would think that, in art class, they want to go color, Polly or Freddie. Are you seeing it kind of manifest over into an art class?
That's a really great idea. I mean, Russ, I'm so fortunate for Russ. You just gave me an idea for maybe that we need to put out a children's coloring book. He's amazing. I'm so fortunate. Listen, you could write the best children's book in the land, but if you don't have an illustrator to really, bring the characters to life through artwork, then you're not going to sell any books. And he's so incredibly talented, an award-winning illustrator. So I just feel very fortunate that he has told me, as many Freddie books as I do, he will be along for the ride.
How'd you find Russ?
I was lucky. My publisher found him. I guess when I first came up with the idea for Freddie and I had put my manuscript in, they gave me a couple of illustrators and they gave me samples of their work, and Russ had sort of given me his vision for Freddie before he was even, the color was added to him. And I just thought, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I pictured him to be. So, and he's a sweet man too. You never know if you're partnered up with somebody if you're going to get along with them, but we love each other. He's great.
Janice, how long does it take to really do a book? I mean, does each book take 90 days, 6 months? How does that go?
So the first book was really my first baby. That one was hard because I'd had to find a publisher, and I go out and I talk to people about publishing books, and it's not as easy as you think it is. And a lot of people think they have ideas for a great children's book, and unfortunately it's a little harder than you think it's going to be.
Yeah.
And I had to go through a couple of publishers. I had to go through some no, we're not interested stages. And I would say from the idea of writing children's weather books to actually getting one published probably took 5 years.
Wow.
Yep. And then from there, once I found the publisher and the right illustrator, it doesn't take me long. So we've put out 5 books in 5 years. So, now that we've got the characters and now that we sort of know what the storyline is going to be and what everything looks like, then it's a little easier. But from the actual conception to actually publishing a book, it took a few years.
Woo! Now, I noticed at the front of the books that you actually have done some real work in collaboration with some agencies, government agencies like NOAA and the Department of Commerce. Can you share some of that background with us?
Well, that's the great thing. Along the way, I've met some great people with the American Meteorological Society. I'm a member of the AMS Society. A sealed member, so they've acknowledged my work as a broadcaster and a meteorologist in talking to the public and warning the public. So I've had a relationship with them for 14 years since I've been at Fox.
Wow.
And when I went out to write these books, I wanted to, make sure that government officials knew that they were out there, and I've always given them a shout out when it comes to writing lists of things to do and how to prepare and websites to go to. And of course, NOAA was always there, and the National Weather Service. And over the years, I've had relationships with a lot of great people with those government services and agencies. And when I guess a few of them got word that there was a children's book out there that educated kids about weather, they decided to put their stamp of approval on it. So NOAA has made Freddie a weather-ready ambassador for them. And listen, that's great. If they're giving their seal of approval to Freddie, then things are looking up.
So our little ambassador here, is he in costume and is he visiting schools with you?
That's another great idea, Denise.
Stick with me, kid. We'll go to Broadway.
We'll go
together.
places. I would love that. That's a fantastic idea. I have, big dreams for this frog. We've been talking to a few companies that are interested in maybe making Freddie a series, an animated series, which would be wonderful. I'd love to have a little Freddie stuffed animal, a little Freddie plushie at some point, or maybe Freddie umbrellas. But listen, I feel blessed to be able to write these books, get them in schools, get them on bookshelves. And, the greatest compliment you could ever give me is, if a parent or a teacher said, my kids want to, will read this over and over again. I had a parent actually tell me the other day that they had to hide their Freddie the Frogcaster because they were getting so sick of reading it to their kids. So,
well, here's another one. Do a phone app for the parents.
Yes, there is a phone app for that for kids. Yeah, so Freddie the Frogcaster, it's a free app on iTunes that you can download. It's Freddie the Frogcaster's weather station, and like I said, it's free, and there's no ads. So you can put in your zip code and your forecast will come out and Freddie will give you your forecast. I'm actually really proud of that app. I'm glad you brought it up. I can't believe I didn't think about telling you about it in the first place.
Well, I didn't know about it either. But cool.
But now you do.
Does Freddie send out emails?
So Freddie has a website, FreddieTheFrogcaster.com. Freddie is on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And like you mentioned, you can download some information and write down and make sure that kids can write down their weather diaries. There's access to that on the website. But listen, I would love to have like a blast that goes out to students and teachers of Freddie's lesson of the day. I think I would have to probably employ more people, but who knows? The future looks bright.
Well, this has taken on another whole life. Did you expect it to be as consuming as it has been?
It's a good problem to have. Let's just say that. And I've kind of got all I can handle right now. But I'll take it on with Freddie and Russ. I'll be able to do whatever it takes to make sure that Freddie is worldwide.
Now, when you show up at an event with your books, what are these kids? I mean, I'm looking at the faces of these kids, their expressions, and they're absolutely priceless. Are you getting audiences with parents and kids and teachers that are building in scope? And there were 20 here, but now all of a sudden you're looking at 200 or 300 in front of you.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's one thing I wish I could do more of is go out to schools across the country, and maybe that's on the horizon at some point, is to be able to actually be in auditoriums and talk about Freddie, because it's certainly something that I love to do. But listen, I'm so fortunate to hear from parents and teachers and kids all over the country that love Freddie, and even in Canada now, I'm getting emails from people in Canada that enjoy Freddie as well. So it's listen, weather is universal. It connects all of us. It's something that we all experience. So I certainly would love it if Freddie could hop along to different countries, and that would certainly be great.
Does he have a YouTube channel?
Not yet, but again, another great idea from Denise.
Maybe you ought to go work for Regnery, although they're constantly calling me. I got an author for you. Got an author for you. They're great people over there.
Yeah, they really are.
Now, I do know that, going back into the school days and into the classrooms at the elementary level, there were always these little days where teachers would bring in the classes and they would show film or, kind of a video. Is that a possibility? Because I am finding so many cool components with Freddie the Frogcaster here. And to enrich a kid's life educationally, as you say, sometimes they don't even know what they're learning, and they're learning, when it goes to science and it goes to math and it goes to, I would even say social skills, community kind of service thing. There's a lot of moving parts to this, Janice, and there's a lot of things to be exploited. So I need for you to do a video that can go into the schools when you can't be there. How about that?
Excellent idea. Listen, I mean, we have to admit, when we used to go to school, it was textbooks, and now they're learning things on their smart boards and on iPads and all that kind of thing. So you have to embrace the technology. But listen, as much as technology kind of takes over our lives, there's nothing like a great hardback book and sitting there with your kids. I do it every single night with my children with books, and it's just that connecting moment where you are reading to them and you have a physical book with pages. There's something very magical about that I hope we never lose.
Are your own kids ever involved in your work?
Well, yeah, I go to their school every year, when there's a new Freddie out. I it's so funny because I see their little faces in the audience. At first, I think they're a little embarrassed because their mom is up there reading her book. But at the end of it, I see that they're proud. So certainly they're involved with everything that I do. Everything I do is for them. So they'll always be involved with my work.
So beyond the eclipse, and going into space, where else are you planning Freddie to go?
Well, I'll give you a little preview of what
All right, cool.
what I think my next book is going to be. And I haven't told many people this, Denise, so
Yay.
keep it under your hat.
Okay.
So I think the next book, maybe Freddie needs to meet more friends in the forest that do forecasting. Maybe Freddie isn't the only animal or amphibian that does this kind of work. And I think that might open up an even wider field, so to speak, for Freddie and his friends.
I think you got that hint, Janice, because during the eclipse, we saw all kinds of cows laying down in the pasture like it was about to be nighttime. Is that where that came from?
Yeah, I mean, sure. There are all sorts of there are all sorts of animals out there that do some forecasting for us. If it comes to
Really do.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, animals are in touch with the weather like no other forecaster. They've been doing it for centuries, so we have to take some lessons from our furry friends.
Is that coming from the change in barometric pressure?
I think it has a lot of. I think there are a lot of little tools that they use or clues that you can take from. I certainly think the barometric pressure is one of them. I think the moisture in the atmosphere, the wind direction. Animals we don't give animals the credit that they deserve in terms of predicting things that are on the horizon.
Well, the Farmer's Almanac tries to tell us all that, but nobody reads the Farmer's Almanac anymore. Janice, do people get mad at you because of the way when you predict bad weather coming that's going to spoil somebody's weekend, or the storm fell apart and you told everybody? I mean, do you make as many enemies in weather forecasting as you do friends? I know that people always say, these weather forecasters, they never get it right.
I'm lucky because I do a pretty broad forecast. I do the nation's forecast, so I'm not as detailed as our local forecasters. But I am always quick to tell people, to listen to your local forecasters, that we would rather have people mad at us for getting the forecast wrong than having them not be prepared. And listen, you're never going to have a perfect forecast. It is impossible. The forecasting tools are getting better, so we're getting better at predicting it. But like I said, I would take thousands of emails from people who are mad and me not being able to prepare them for something that potentially could affect their lives.
You just mentioned technology. There is some amazing technology that is coming to market and being deployed that is doing a much better job. I know, being here in Florida, in Hurricane Alley down here, that, we see some amazing kind of renderings of lightning strikes and how low the clouds are from a 3D perspective. Do any of your students or any of your readers express any kind of interest in that?
Absolutely. One of the first questions I ask them before I read the book is, has anyone ever thought about being a meteorologist? Do you think you would like to do that job? And, a few of them will put their hands up. But after I read the book and we start to talk about weather and what I do, there's a few more hands that go up afterwards when I ask them the same question.
Kind of maybe terrifying for those parents, because their kids are going to be smarter than they, correct?
Listen, if my kids are smarter than me, I think that's a good thing.
I do too. Well, the flash flood one, your most recent one, is a big benefit, and I would say, looking through this book, there were some interesting things in there that, as you say, can affect any place in the globe. I mean, we're seeing floods and mudslides and all these other kinds of things. So, has your distribution gone international yet?
We're actually translating Freddie into Chinese and I believe Mandarin. Yes, Freddie is going over to China and teaching kids over there. So I'm very excited about that. And I also hear that frogs are good luck in China. So maybe onwards to bigger things for Freddie.
Wow, going international to China. We need Europe over there and whatnot. Well, we're so grateful for your excellent work. We love seeing happiness on television, and you are certainly the happiest weather machine in history, as I mentioned earlier. Congratulations on all your success, and we're beyond grateful for your time here on the Denise Simon Experience, and come back again, because this has been a fascinating backstory on how all this came to be.
Denise, thank you, and thank you for your amazing ideas. Freddie is going places.
Yes, I can see that. I'm going to see him on video and on my local Fox forecast.
I love it.
There's Freddie, the broadcaster, walking across the screen. All right, ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so stay with us.
You're listening to Red Nation Rising Radio, the new dominant force in conservative internet talk radio.
Hi, thank you for listening. My name is Ron Phillips, and I'm the owner and operations manager of Talk America Radio. It is with great pride that I offer you these two 24/7 streams of some of the finest talk radio programming in the country, but I need your support. Talk America Radio is a listener-supported network. That means we need your help to continue to offer the quality programming you're hearing right now. Please visit talkamericaradio.us and click the Support Us button. You can contribute monthly or send us a one-time amount. We'll put it to good use continuing to share the American voice. Thank you.
Hi, this is Michelle Malkin from CRTV.com, and you're listening to Talk America Radio, the new dominant force in conservative talk radio.
This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
Hi, it's Mark Walters from Armed American Radio. You know, for nearly a decade, I've been educating, informing, and entertaining responsibly armed Americans. And during that time together, we've shared some ups and downs, haven't we? Trump's election saved our Supreme Court and no doubt the future of our gun rights for now. But now is not the time to lay down. The enemies of freedom are well-funded and more determined than ever. To keep up with the state of your gun rights, make sure to tune in to Armed American Radio right here on Talk America Radio, the new dominant voice in conservative talk radio.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia. And WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Woo! We're going to talk about one of those hot topics, you know, one of the things that's taking all the oxygen out of the atmosphere. And I would say that is free speech. Well, maybe not. I have a previous guest here with us that it's too much fun to talk to. And don't get upset because he's a lawyer, but he's one of the good guys. And it's Mark Miller with the Pacific Legal Foundation. And Mark is the managing attorney at Pacific Legal Foundation in the Atlantic Division, and president of the Martin County Bar Association. And he got a what do you call it? A spur in your saddle, maybe, like the rest of us, Mark.
Good way to put it.
Well, thank you for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience, and I'll set the table for you this way. we have this thing called the First Amendment, which is supposed to be, as they say, free speech, which is a very abbreviated form of what the First Amendment's representing. But I'm going to say not really, because free speech now comes with special fees that you have to pay, an application for a permit that you have to get somebody's permission or denial on, and then you have specific zones where you can practice your free speech if you've paid your fee and you're granted the approval. Did I get that right?
That's about right, and I would agree that with what you're implying, which is how we get from you can't abridge free speech to what you just described in terms of permits and licenses and time, place, and manner restrictions is certainly interesting.
I mean, we are a permission society here, and we're asking permission of people who, one, don't know us, and we don't know them. And we can't travel freely, and we can't speak freely. We can't think freely. We can't pray freely wherever the event, the day, the hour, the minute may take us. But you did a cool thing. You wrote over on the Pacific Legal Foundation blog, otherwise known as the Liberty blog, I think?
That's right, Denise. Yeah.
The Liberty blog. And I think you've probably gotten a lot of responses, and certainly the reason that we tapped you on the shoulder and you're here with us on the Denise Simon Experience, and that is free speech at the University of Florida after Charlottesville. And again, somebody applied for a permit to appear on the campus, probably attached a fee, and some university president went,
Yeah, and so what we've seen, Denise, that's exactly right. And what led me to write about this free speech on college campus issue is that after Charlottesville and after the tragedy of the young lady losing her life and the law enforcement officers in the helicopter that crashed, a local journalist here in Florida asked me what I thought about the University of Florida, which had decided that the president had decided that he would reject one of the individuals who was leading the Charlottesville white nationalist side. His name is Richard Spencer. He had asked for a permit to speak at UF, and I think initially the school had said yes, and so the president reversed the decision. And so this journalist wanted to know what I thought, because she knew at Pacific Legal Foundation we are pretty strong on the constitutional rights of individuals when it comes to government overreach, and so she wanted to know what I would think, particularly since I'm a double gator. I graduated University of Florida both undergrad and law school. And, I wrote about, so her article was a good one, and I think she agreed with me that ultimately, even though I reject out of hand what these racists and white nationalists, or whatever they want to call themselves, this guy Spencer, someone educated me, he calls himself an identitarian, and so he doesn't call himself a Nazi or a Klan member. Well, whatever he calls himself, he was at a rally, and one of the leaders of a rally where they said, Jews will not replace us, and ran around with tiki torches. So as far as I'm concerned, he can call himself whatever he wants. He's clearly a racist anti-Semite. But so I got educated on that this week. But the bottom line is, for the University of Florida or Texas A&M or Penn State, which I think just turned him down as well, and Texas A&M turned him down, I think that they may be violating the First Amendment, regardless of what I think of this individual, when they reject his right to speak, unless they have really clear threats. And unfortunately, regardless of unfortunately, under the Constitution, the fact that something bad happened somewhere else isn't enough to stop him from speaking on these college campuses. In their defense, I'll say that the First Amendment, and in the defense of the general idea you and I are talking about in terms of permitting and such at speeches in public forums, the First Amendment does say you have the right to peaceably assemble. And what we saw in Charlottesville, particularly on Friday night with these people marching and screaming, Jews will not replace us, and having torches and the like, is they were certainly going up to the line of sort of trying to encourage violence. Mm-hmm. And I understand many of them were armed, and the ACLU, who I oftentimes do not agree with, the ACLU and Pacific Legal oftentimes don't agree, but on First Amendment we generally are lined up together, and sometimes we even do briefs together when it comes to freedom of speech, because it's sort of where the left and right come together and recognize the left may recognize they don't want President Trump deciding what they can say, and the right may recognize They don't want President Obama or President Clinton deciding what they can say. And it's better for the country that we be able to exchange ideas and ferret out what are the right ideas, what are the correct ideas, and what's the best way to lead our country. But at the same time, the First Amendment does say the right to peaceably assemble. And so certainly balancing safety against speech is something we have to do, and the Supreme Court has done it, and the Supreme Court has made the point that we're going to err very much on the side of speech, and it may cause a problem. Charlottesville is a good example where the court thought it was following precedent of the Supreme Court, where this Spencer, represented by the ACLU, wanted to march downtown in downtown Charlottesville. And the city said, we want you to be outside of town. We think it'd be easier to control the situation, time, place, and manner. We think we can regulate it to a different part of the town that would be easier to keep the public peace. The judge, and I'm not going to say, I do not want to be said to be, hindsight is 20/20. I'm not criticizing him, but unfortunately, the way things worked out, we saw what this 20-year-old crazy man did, where he drove into a crowd, and maybe the speech could have been outside of town, and the same thing would have happened. I don't know, but unfortunately, that's what the University of Florida president Kent Fuchs had to deal with. That's what Texas A&M, Penn State have to deal with. And it's interesting. Spencer has not. When I wrote that blog earlier this week, the assumption was, and it was being said, that he was going to sue. And in fact, our governor here in the state of Florida, where I am sitting, he said he would send in the National Guard to help. But so far, Mr. Spencer and his supporters have not sued, and we'll see. Maybe he's decided he was causing more harm to whatever he thinks is his ideas than good. I don't know, but if he does sue, I think a judge is most likely going to have to rule in favor of him being allowed to speak under strict controls to keep the public safety, as like in Boston, I think they were able to keep safety last weekend.
Well, in the case of Spencer, I don't think that he is coming with some kind of armed militia such that he would cause some kind of, or infer some kind of non-peaceful talk. But I don't know. I can't, I don't know how that would play out. And on the other hand, there is a public safety component because of you cannot judge what people that are attending in one form or another, what their behavior is going to be. Mark, in your blog on the 21st, you used a phrase that I really liked, and that is the power of reason. And that is what I would argue is completely missing since Charlottesville, or even before that, if we go back to UC Berkeley, right?
I agree that the mob mentality, we're seeing this mob mentality on social media. We're seeing the mob mentality with the statues that, I think it's perfectly reasonable to ask cities who put up these statues 50 years ago of Confederate veterans, or 100 years ago, whatever it was. It's certainly reasonable to say, through the public process, we want these removed. And maybe in your city, you'll decide that. But it's another thing altogether for there to be mobs threatening violence. And
destroying them. It's government
UC
property.
Berkeley, right? Mm-hmm. Destroying the monuments, these statues, or what we saw in UC Berkeley, where there was, crazy. It's hard to keep all the different violent activities separate, but as I recall, either because of Milo or Ann Coulter at UC Berkeley, there was rioting. I think it was the Milo night that there was rioting, and then a week or two later, Ann Coulter was going to speak, and they used that violence to shut her down. And we don't want, in our country, a heckler's veto. We don't want the idea that if you don't like what someone's saying, you can prevent them from speaking, because all you're going to do is sort of you're going to create this sort of poison idea of the apple, Adam and Eve. We're not allowed to eat the apple. It must be good. Let's find out what it is. And if you hide what these white nationalists are saying, then people are going to think there must be something to it, as opposed to exposing it to the light of day and recognizing it's just garden variety racism, anti-Semitism, what have you, and there's nothing to it. There's no logic or as you said, reason to it. I saw a law professor who I like, who's, again, probably a little more liberal than me. She's at the University of Wisconsin. And when she was talking about the statues, and her point about the statues was whether or not you think the statues should remain, for example, in Baltimore, they removed these statues. I think there was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Roger Taney, who was the Chief Justice for the Dred Scott decision, and he wrote the opinion. He wrote the opinion that kept slavery said it was legal under the Constitution. And so they removed that statue in the middle of the night. And her point was, I may not think that statue should be there, but if the government thinks that, then shouldn't it be doing that in the middle of the day? Like if it's doing something under cover of darkness, maybe there's a reason, they're doing, it's under cover of darkness. And it'd be better, it's not a good thing. We believe, like say public records, we believe things should be open to the sunshine. We want to see what our government is doing. And if it's doing something under cover of darkness, whether it be breaking into the Watergate Hotel or removing a statue in the middle of the night, they're probably up to no good. And so let's get away from mob mentality. Let's get away from doing things secretly and do things out in the open. And if we decide these statues should be removed, or like in the case of the Jefferson Memorial, we decide there should be something added to make it clear to anyone who doesn't know, particularly young people. Whenever I go to the Jefferson Memorial in D.C., there's certainly usually classes of students there, no matter what time of year it is. And so to add something there to reflect that Jefferson, as great as he was, also was a slave owner, and to show our leaders, whether they be 200 years ago, our founding fathers, or our current leaders, they are not perfect. They have failures, profound failures in the case of Jefferson with slavery. President Washington had slaves as well. You can if you read the story of George Washington, his life, he believed he took good care of his slaves, and he believed they'd be worse off if he were to have freed them. But nevertheless, I think we can look back and say that was probably the wrong decision. But the bottom line is, he knew at the time that there were two failings of his administration, and that he knew they were going to haunt the country, and one was slavery, and the other was the issue of Native Americans and what to do about Native Americans or Indians. And these men, they knew. These men then, and our leaders now, men or women, they're not perfect. And it's better for us to say they're not perfect than to erase history and pretend that Civil War didn't happen. If we erase history, then it's a better chance we're going to repeat it, the failings.
And Mark, I would argue that there's always more to the story because it's every year. More research is done, more documents are declassified, if you will. More archivists have discovered some things that have, over 200 years they didn't know before. So, in the case of some Civil War general or some founding father did something that today we think is reprehensible, that in many of those cases, Mark, I would argue that we don't know the whole story.
Yeah, I would agree.
Some of them made a lot of corrections because they saw what was wrong, but those corrections aren't even out there. So when it comes down to these governors and these mayors and these city councils, they too don't even know the rest of the story.
Yeah, I think, for example, Nancy Pelosi, if I understand correctly, and that's a big if, but if I understand correctly, her father was one of the leaders in Baltimore who put up some of these statues that they're now trying to tear down. And couldn't she be helpful if she were to say, well, this is what my father would have been thinking then, and maybe now we look at things differently. But instead, she reacts reflexively to the mob and just says, let's get rid of everything. And it sends the wrong message. Our leaders have to, I think if we want to see tempers cooled, our leaders have to do a better job of acting coolly as well and rationally and reasonably. Statesmanship, that's so true. Where are the statesmen? That's a very good question.
And it kind of goes back to the phrase that you used in your article of the power of reason. She could have easily been a statesman. Nancy Pelosi, could have easily been a statesperson and and said, hey, yeah, this happened. And this is where we are today. So let's put things in a timeline, put them in context, and let's have a discussion of reason. And I haven't seen a mayor, I haven't seen a city council that has kind of brought these factions together at a table where there is a rational, cogent debate, discussion, where there's an accommodation that has come out at the end. And we've been at this now several months, correct?
Yes. And, the idea of these statues now are the trendy item, and what are we going to move on to 6 months from now? Charles Barkley, famous basketball player, who tends to call things the way he sees them. Sometimes he's conservative, sometimes he's perceived as liberal. But he says, who cared about these statues? I don't think I ever looked, I'm just paraphrasing, but he's like, whoever looked at these statues before? And that's kind of, to an extent, where I come from. It's one thing in Washington, D.C. Certainly we go to the Lincoln Memorial, the Jefferson Memorial, the Vietnam Memorial, and now we have the World War II Memorial, and we all go out of our way to see them. But your typical run-of-the-mill statue in downtown Palm Beach or in Charlottesville. Who's even looking at these statues? And so all the more reason not to just react hysterically and hotly, but rather let's try and handle things, as you said, statesman-like, statesperson-like, and maybe we can modify them. Maybe we can add more information.
Another
to
plaque that says
exactly.
This is what, an additional plaque. This is what he did the rest of his life. And it'd be interesting to go to one of the librarians or the archivists at the National Archives and say to them, would you tell us how many requests you have for people that are wanting to come in and get the files and the documents of these Civil War rebel KKK whatever, so we can learn the rest of the story? And I guarantee you the answer would be none.
Yes. Yeah. I would agree. I would not take that bet. I'm sure you're right.
So back to Richard Spencer. I'm guessing that he is not pressing the University of Florida and any other. He isn't necessarily building a case saying that I have gone to Penn State, I've gone to the University of Texas or Texas A&M or University of Florida, and all of these universities are denying me I have a feeling that's really what he's doing here. Do you think that there's a chance of that, such that at some point he's going to do maybe some kind of a class action lawsuit?
Well, that's a good insight. It's certainly possible that he would intend to sue, but I think the remedy ultimately would be just to give him the platform. So I don't know what he's waiting on, other than the ACLU did take a bit of a different tack after Charlottesville and say that if people are going to want to march with guns, open carry or what have you, that they're not going to represent those individuals. And so I have wondered, the media has not reported that that's the issue between the ACLU and Spencer, but there's not going to be too many lawyers who are willing to take on Spencer's case, and ACLU is one of those groups that will. And again, it's to their credit, even though what he thinks is reprehensible, they're making a very good point when they say we represent people whose point of view are abhorrent, because everyone should have the chance to speak in the public forum so that we can review their ideas. But they've sort of changed the tack, and on some media I've heard them criticized for that. I don't know that I'm willing to go that far to criticize them. I would think it might be a reasonable request from their part to say, look, if you want us to represent you, you don't need to, Second Amendment's controversial, First Amendment's controversial. Let's try to keep them separate, particularly when violence is at issue. I'm not saying they're right for that, but they're, number one, they're private. They're not the government. It's one thing I've heard them getting attacked is how dare they do that? Well, they're a private organization. They can choose to represent whoever they want. And so what does it say about the First Amendment if they're changing their tack a little bit? Well, I think maybe they're trying to contribute to the idea that we need cooler heads. What we saw in Charlottesville, clearly something went awry. We have a young woman, a paralegal, I think she was 32 years old, who was doing nothing more. She was not a member of Antifa, from what I understand, or however you pronounce that word. She was not a leftist. She was not a nationalist. She just simply thought racists were a bad thing, and she wanted to make sure her voice was heard. And in response to that, a crazy 20-year-old ran her down. And I think there's a number of people who ended up in the hospitals, but of course she lost her life, and of course the two law enforcement officers as well. And so I don't know that I would hold them in too much opprobrium that they said we would like to see those issues separate. So I don't know if that's what's holding back Spencer. It has been interesting because certainly early last week it was being reported beyond a doubt that he intended to sue the University of Florida. But since then, it's been quiet.
Well, I do think there are some lawyers that will jump in. I mean, if you've got the lawyers that are representing Gitmo detainees pro bono, I'm sure that you'd have some of the same, sympathetic lawyers that would kind of jump in. I would argue that, interesting term, but I mean, I would argue that if it does go into a court, it would be an epic case. I mean, I can't think of a lawyer across the country that wouldn't be paying attention to presentation.
Well, I think you're right. Certainly the most famous, case I can think of, a relatively recent vintage, and I alluded to it in my blog, is the Skokie American Nazi Party, where the ACLU represented Skokie Nazis in Skokie, Illinois, where there was a large, or I think there still is a large Jewish population, predominantly Jewish population, and so the Nazis wanted to march there, and the ACLU represented them, and so we still know that case. It's a famous case, and yes, if Spencer or one of his affiliated groups were to sue UF or Texas A&M or Penn State, yeah, I think it would be pretty big news. Yeah, I think epic is the right word. Yep. And so, we say that, but at the same time, who knew Charlottesville? Like, I didn't even know until after the fact that a judge had made a determination that yes, I'm gonna order that the city of Charlottesville allow them to march downtown as opposed to outside of town. So, but I think you're right. At this point, it's such a flashpoint. I think it would be epic, and it would be national news and probably live on TV.
Yeah, and the sad part about it is, this is, I think, where we are as the deck chair off the Titanic. We're not finished with this kind of stuff. I mean, if we can now determine that the USC Trojan horse is racist, these are all objects, if you will, that can't defend themselves. A statue can't fight back. You have to have people to do that. And so they're almost a proxy trophy here for this argument. And sadly, it's getting pressed globally, where we look like a bunch of idiots here in the United States to the rest of the world.
Yeah, I think I saw, it's hard to keep up with the news and the sort of free speech and the intersection of free speech and racial issues, but I think I saw the UN as saying that, U.S. is a racist country or something to that effect, and that's certainly outrageous. E pluribus unum, out of many one, our country is a melting pot. The idea that our current president thinks we need to enforce the laws that are on the books, which by and large is all he has been doing in terms of immigration, and it's why I think we've seen the immigration, the migrants dropping down in terms of the southern border, because they recognize, okay, the country now is going to follow the laws that have been on the books. I think that's the real problem, I would say, getting a little far afield, but if the government had just followed the rules that it had put on the books, then a lot of our immigration issue that's in the national news would have never erupted the way it did. And so it puts our current president in a funny position, because now we have all these people who came here thinking our country was welcoming them because the country wasn't enforcing the rules, and now he's saying, well, I think we should enforce the rules. And it's considered outrageous by some, but frankly, 25 years ago, President Clinton was saying the same thing. So, this country is not, we certainly have there's always room for progress, but the country has come a long way since the 60s.
And it isn't finished.
Right, and it isn't finished. And it's our responsibility to try and make it better. And I think that's, really the beauty of what our founding fathers, despite their weaknesses, what they were able to set up, which was a country that believed that we were all equal. And Lincoln was then, through the Reconstruction, through the war, and then the Reconstruction Amendment, we were able to improve the country. And Martin Luther King Jr. then forced it to be improved even more through his peaceful actions, and his peaceful disobedience. And it's on us to ratchet back the violence and the hotness, and do things reasonably, and continue to make our country better.
And the word is onward. Ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause to Mark Miller. Please go visit pacificlegal.org and click on the Liberty blog, because their lawyers are just doing remarkable work over there. I love having all of you guys on the show every once in a while. It's fun because there's another kind of machinery that's going on that never gets in headlines. So well done, Mark, and come back soon. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Denise. You too. Thanks for having me on.
All right, thanks.
You're listening to Red Nation Rising Radio, the new dominant force in conservative internet talk radio.
You can't handle the truth. The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. See ya, over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. See ya, out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Participate suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1, grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds AGPT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. I've got the distinct honor of having the First Liberty Institute with us. That is a nonprofit law firm out of Plano, Texas. And if you've been following any part of the news, particularly with regard to Coach Kennedy from Bremerton High School, who was fired from his job for praying on the 50-yard line, First Liberty is the law firm of record that is representing him. And with us, who's the Deputy General Counsel, former Marine, I might add, Semper Fi, sir, and the Director of Military Affairs. So, Mike, thanks so much for being with us to talk about these cases.
Thanks for having me on. It's great to be with you.
You know, Mike, your firm has actually represented quite a lot of cases, and I don't think it's by any mistake that your firm is First Liberty by a long stretch. But you've got, going through some of the caseload that you have. There's a lot of them, and that just tells us that we've got a bigger problem here. That I didn't really realize. I mean, I knew some of these cases that your firm was representing, but I had no concept of the numbers. This is kind of an assault, I think, that's just going on here. Did I overstate that, Mike?
No, I think you hit it right on the head. I mean, there truly is an assault on our religious freedom in this country, and it's not limited to football coaches in Washington State. It's happening on the East Coast, on the West Coast, and really, I think to many people's surprise, it's actually just as bad in what we would call the Bible Belt of the country. Yeah. It's just as bad in the South as it is anywhere else. There really is a strong movement by well-funded, well-organized groups and organizations that want to take away religious freedom from Americans.
This is a stunning concept here. I saw where you have actually given congressional testimony, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, before what committee?
The House Armed Services Committee.
And when was that?
That was either 2014 or 2015.
We need to do it again, don't we?
I think so. I think that this is something that's not going to go away with just one congressional hearing. Obviously, we're very grateful that there are members of our Congress who are very engaged in this issue and continue to beat the drum to try to warn Americans that if we don't do something to put a stop to this, we're going to lose some of our most fundamental freedoms.
Fundamental. Mike, I think what is happening here is it's almost like you've got constitutional zones. You can only do certain things with regard to the First Amendment, the Second Amendment in designated areas. We've become a permission society. Hello, government. Are we allowed to do this? Yeah, sure you can. But you have to pay for this, apply for a permit, be granted a permit, and then it comes with all these stipulations.
Yeah, that's one of the things that really drives me crazy and upsets me is when I hear people talk about the government giving us rights. And I think the founders of this nation, the people who drafted the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they would be livid if they thought that what they created and what they founded as a nation had turned into a place where the average American thinks that rights come from the government, that the government gives us rights. No. As the founders put it, the government exists to recognize the rights that we already have. Our rights are God-given. They're not government-given.
Mm-hmm. Mike, I know there's there's got to be frustration with all of the lawyers over there at First Liberty. Do you have a particular case outside of Coach Kennedy that stands out in particular?
Oh man, there's so many. I mean, I could. I mean, it'd be too easy to pick and choose, but I'll just mention one that many folks have probably heard about or read about, or maybe not, and would be shocked if they knew about it. But I'll just quickly tell you about the case of Aaron and Melissa Klein. These are the quote unquote the Christian bakers from Oregon.
Yep.
And Aaron and Melissa, their dream was to start their own business, and Melissa has a natural talent for baking and for cake artistry. She creates beautiful custom cakes and wedding cakes, for that matter. And a same-sex couple approached her and asked her to design and create a custom wedding cake for their same-sex marriage ceremony. And the clients, based on their sincerely held religious beliefs, as Christians, they politely declined, and they in fact referred the couple to another baker that they knew who they thought would do a really good job. And in fact, the clients had served this couple in the past, but just not for a custom, not for a custom wedding cake, right? Mm-hmm. And so, lo and behold, the couple filed a complaint with the state of Oregon. To make a long story short, the state of Oregon has now penalized Aaron and Melissa Klein and their family $135,000 because of the quote unquote the infliction of emotional distress on the couple. So they penalized them $135,000. They've been forced to close their business, their family business, the American dream, so to speak, and the court even, or not the court, the state of Oregon even issued a gag order on Aaron and Melissa, telling them that they were not allowed to speak about their religious beliefs when it comes to the issue of marriage. That's the United States of America that we live in today, people. I mean, that's $135,000. I don't know about you, but I don't have $135,000 sitting around to pay a penalty simply for wanting to exercise my First Amendment freedom.
Didn't we have the prior administration that was also essentially suing the Little Sisters of the Poor? The Little Sisters of the Poor had to sue the prior administration. Yeah. But because the prior administration was forcing, through Obamacare, was forcing an order of nuns, the Little Sisters of the Poor, to provide abortion-inducing contraceptives to the nuns, to pay for that, and it just makes no sense. And the government at that time, under the previous administration, said, "I'm sorry, too bad. It's the law. This is what we have decreed, and you must follow." Let's circle back here a little bit to Coach Kennedy, because Coach Kennedy actually tried to be somewhat accommodating to the school, did he not?
That's right. And for a brief period of time, he actually did accommodate the school. And complied, and then realized that through trying to comply with the school's order, and just for folks who for the handful of people who may not have heard about this story by now, Coach Kennedy is a football coach at a public high school in Bremerton, Washington, which is a suburb of Seattle, and he was ordered by his employer, by the school. I'm sorry, I should back up real fast. So Coach Kennedy, he has a commitment that he made, or some people would even refer to it as a covenant that he made, that after every game, win or lose, no matter how well the team played or how poorly they played, he was going to briefly, like 15 to 30 seconds, kneel at midfield and give thanks to God for what his players just did on the field, and really for the opportunity to be their coach. And to be very clear, Coach Kennedy does not request or require to do this in the presence of students or athletes or fans. He's totally fine. In fact, wants to do it by himself. He doesn't want to be surrounded by players or anything like that. It's not even audible. It would basically be like a moment of silence. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference whether he's tying his shoe, looking for a lost contact lens, or kneeling in prayer. I mean, literally, you would not be able to tell the difference between the three of those. But obviously, as a devout Christian man, he is kneeling in prayer, in silent prayer for 15 to 30 seconds, just giving thanks. And that's it. And then he stands up and runs off the field. Well, the school district told him that because people can see what he's doing and somebody might be offended, that they ordered him to stop, or else they were going to punish him. And in fact, and like you said, for a brief time, he complied with that because he wasn't sure what his rights are. I mean, as many folks don't know, what are our rights under the First Amendment? Do I have to follow what my employer says, or do I have a First Amendment right to do this? He contacted us, and we advised him that the Constitution protects your right to do this, and so he told the school district, I have to do this. This is part of who I am, and if we're going to live in a diverse and tolerant, pluralistic society, then shouldn't all of our viewpoints and backgrounds and religions and creeds, et cetera, be tolerated and accepted? Well, the school district said, if you do it again, you're going to be fired, and he had to stay true to who he is and his commitment to do this, to give thanks after every football game, and he did that the next game, and they fired him.
Well, let me ask you this bizarre question. You've got Jews that wear a yarmulke. You've got Muslims that wear whatever variety of garb that they're wearing. You have the sheiks, you got the Hindus. So visibly, what is the difference? You see somebody kneeling at the 50 who's not wearing anything, maybe other than a pair of jeans and a windbreaker, but he's kneeling for seconds, to seeing people of other religious sects in physical attire, in physical visibility of somebody, and they're not offended. I mean, something's not working here.
Legally, there is no difference. There is no difference legally speaking, other than the fact that the school district has decided to single out Coach Kennedy. Mm-hmm. That's really the only difference, because in fact, in the legal record, as we produced it, at trial, there is another football coach, when he's now a former football coach there, but was a football coach at the same time as Coach Kennedy, who happens to be a Buddhist. And he would go to midfield and perform a Buddhist chant after the football games, and nothing ever happened to him.
Wow. That's a little detail that hasn't come out.
Yeah, I mean, the mainstream media conveniently leaves that out and tries to portray Coach Kennedy in the worst light possible. But I obviously we just have to continue to fight for religious liberty and for Coach Kennedy's rights and
anybody else's.
That's right.
Now, the school says that they did not want to have the message misconstrued that the school has an endorsement of religion. Is that religion in total, or just certain religions?
Well, it's interesting because there are several federal court cases that say if the school is worried about that type of message getting out, there's a very simple solution, and that's called what we call a disclaimer. So, in other words, yes. you can, and we hear this all the time, right? I mean, in radio, for example, since we're talking in the radio, the views expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, or so on and so forth, right? So, the school district could do something like that, but even bigger beyond that, the concern about the endorsement of religion is interesting because there's also constitutional cases that talk about the fact that the government has to be neutral. So neutral means you cannot endorse, but nor can you be hostile to religion. In other words, the government's job is to be blind to that, and somehow that's fallen on deaf ears. These days, that second part of that, everybody seems to be overly concerned with. Well, we can't do anything. They believe that the prohibition against endorsing religion means that they must be hostile to religion, and that's actually incorrect. I mean, that's never been the law in this country.
We keep hearing separation of church and state, and I would argue that there isn't really any such thing. Did I get that wrong, Mike?
In terms of that phrase appearing in the Constitution, it appears nowhere in the Constitution.
Okay.
And so, obviously, Many people are familiar with that phrase, but it is a concept that has been created, and it's now used as a catchphrase. But really, there are two competing schools of thought on when it comes to religion in in public society, and in this country at least. And one is that there is a camp of people that are what we would call strict separationists. In other words, they believe that there should never be any type of religion in public that the government is involved in. But then there's another camp that are and that school of thought really started to come into vogue in the mid 20th century. But you have another camp that has been around a lot longer than that, since the time of the founding, and it's called the accommodationist camp. And they believe that the role of the government is, as I explained a few minutes ago, is under the founders' vision and the people who wrote the Constitution. Their vision for religion in society was that the government can't pick and choose winners and losers. The government will accommodate religion in public, but the government is not there to decide which religion is better than others. In other words, what many of the founders came from in Europe was a system and countries where a nation had an official state religion. A nation might be declared a Catholic nation, right? So that Catholicism is the official religion of that nation. Or the Anglican Church is the official state church. And they decided that in the United States, in the colonies, they were not going to have that type of system. And so, but that did not mean that people could not be free to express or exhibit their own religious beliefs in public, even government officers and officials. So we've moved away from that, unfortunately. Like I said, in probably the last 60 or 70 years, we've really gotten away from that original founding concept.
All right, so we have a loss here when it comes to Coach Kennedy, and I might add that First Liberty is fighting several cases in process now. But the matter of Coach Kennedy, you're still fighting. You got a Ninth Circuit loss. What happens now? Are you seeing this making its way or in a timeline to the Supreme Court? Well,
there's several options available. So, in terms of where do you go from here after a loss, and probably the option that most people would think of, as you just said, would be, okay, go to the Supreme Court. So that's certainly one option. Another one would be, the courts of appeals. Usually, when they hear a case, it's what's called a panel, and a panel consists of 3 judges that are selected at random. And if the panel decision comes out in a way that you don't like, you always have the option of asking what the full court, in other words, all 15 judges, well, typically there's 15 judges, there are sometimes more, sometimes less, but you're going to ask the entire court of, let's just say, for example, 15 judges to hear the case, because you think that perhaps this panel got it wrong, but gosh, if we had all 15 hear it, then we might,
change the dynamic.
We might, exactly. And then, so that's another option. Or, because this case, we're appealing a ruling at the trial court level, you could basically let this ruling sit and then just go back and continue on with the trial. So it's not like that. It's not that we're appealing, the finality of the trial that came out against Coach Kennedy, where no, this was like if you have a 20 steps in a trial, this may be step 3.
Sure.
We didn't like the outcome at step 3, so we're going to appeal. You basically push pause on the trial at step 3. You have an appeal, and then whatever happens at the appeal, it goes back, and you just pick up where you left off.
What's Coach Kennedy doing today?
He's, obviously he's not coaching, which is very disappointing to him personally, and to his athletes and students at Bremerton High School. So, he's just living life like the rest of us, doing the best he can, and trying to be optimistic, but also like I said, I think he's still attending football games, but as a fan instead of as a coach, and supporting his team, and he loves those kids and they love him.
Was he also a teacher, or was he only a coach, Mike?
He was only an assistant coach. That was it.
Okay. All right. So he doesn't have any other gainful employment that you are aware of?
He does have another job, but it's not related to coaching or to the school district or anything.
Okay. All right. So you've got several cases in process. Certainly this one's getting an awful lot of recent attention. We talked about the Bakers out there in Oregon, another travesty. How many other law firms are giving, I would say, what do they call it, friends of the court briefings or letters? Are you getting some of that kind of cooperation?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, in cases like this that draw national attention and national headlines, certainly you get a lot of support from fantastic organizations and allies, and we do the same for them as well. Obviously, when one of their cases is going up to the Supreme Court, then we feel it's important to weigh in as well and offer our support.
Is the military sector particularly hostile outside of schools?
I mean, to be honest, it's not a whole lot different in the military than it is in other areas of society, except that, one thing as a veteran myself, I believe that the vast majority of people serving in our military are honorable people who are trying to do the right thing. They're trying to do the best they can. Unfortunately, they haven't been provided with very much guidance on what the law says or how not to violate somebody's First Amendment rights, et cetera. So that's where I think the problem is in the military, is the lack of clear guidance on what the law is and what the law requires.
Well, I think anybody, religious or not, they're always, they may think to themselves a thought that is like some higher power guide me through this or give me some kind of strength. So there's some other kind of subconscious reach to something else, some other entity or spiritual condition that people call on. And I don't think anybody can necessarily deny that, can they?
That's right. I mean, as we said at the beginning, our rights do not come from the government. Mm-hmm. Our rights pre-exist the government. We are born with these rights, just as it says in our Declaration of Independence. And so for anybody from the government to say, you can't do that because we didn't give you the authority to do that, is, I would respectfully question back, well, who gave you the authority to decide?
Right. Well, you can watch some of these, cops and robber movies and TV shows, and, you got some pretty bad criminals out there, and, they're nabbed by law enforcement. And what is the first thing they always say? I have rights.
That's right. That's right.
But you got some guy who is, has a true conviction all the way down to the core of his soul, that wants to do the right thing for himself, between himself and his God, teaching kids football and, strength and all these other kinds of things. And, that ever cherished document, the Constitution, it's supposed to protect him, shield him, and all the other cases you and others are working on, and it's just quite not getting there. But, we wish you some, and all of the lawyers over there at First Liberty, some real savviness when it comes to, taking these cases so you can get a big green check mark on the win column on these. And Mike Berry, former Marine himself, and representing the First Liberty Institute, thanks so much for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience and explaining all this. We're going to be watching this one carefully, and for ladies and gentlemen, jump on over there to firstliberty.org if you would, because you can sign up for their updates and see what's going on. So Mike, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thanks for being with us here, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you again soon.
You're listening to Red Nation Rising Radio, the new dominant force in conservative internet talk radio.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia.
And Don Newen from Cowboy Logic Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't go to sleep every night completely fatigued, from trying to restore America from the destruction that is taking place?
Then you're simply not doing enough. Join us every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, for Cowboy Logic Radio.
Let the restoration begin.
Hi, this is Denise Simon, the host of the Denise Simon Experience. I feel compelled to tell you people that Don Newen is my favorite talk radio host, period. Not Mark Levin, not Rush Limbaugh. I can't do this.
Do it, Denise. Read it. Read it, Denise.
Not Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham, but yep, Don Newen. Cowboy Logic Radio is featuring the ever-stellar, highly gifted Don Newen, right here on Talk America Radio.
This is Don Newen with Cowboy Logic Radio. On behalf of my beautiful co-host, Donna Fiducia, I'd like to express my gratitude to Denise Simon for those kind words. I don't think I could have done it better if I would have written that myself. Cowboy Logic Radio, every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, right here on Talk America Radio. This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia, and WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Denise Simon Experience, where I am proud to announce that we are a part of the digital flagship at talkamericaradio.us. And our terrestrial flagship is WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM, serving South Georgia. And with that, please help me to welcome Professor Sandy Mitcham. He's an author. I think he's got 20 books under his belt. He's a professor, and certainly you've done some professing at West Point, too. So thank you, Professor, for being with us.
Well, I'm delighted to be here.
We're going to talk about your book that came out in 2016, Bust Hell Wide Open, The Life of Nathan Bedford Forrest. But before we get to that, I know that you're reading the headlines, and I would think that at this point you're one frustrated professor. Would that be accurate?
Well, I guess to a degree. It's unfortunate that some people feel it necessary to attack historic monuments that they really don't know much about. But this is America in 2017. It's just the way it is.
And, you know, when history is history, some of it's good and some of it's not so good, but you can't unring a bell, can you?
Well, you can't, but that's part of the objective. A lot of people think that history can't be changed. Well, that's not true. Most people think history is a study of the past, and that's not true either. History is the study of the past with interpretation. If you alter the interpretation, you're effectively altering history, and that's what they're trying to do. That and erase history. People like Robert E. Lee, you can learn a lot from people like General Lee. He wasn't the evil slave master that they're trying to portray him as. He actually opposed slavery, freed the slaves he inherited, and he did it at a great deal of personal expense to himself. to paraphrase him, he would not release uneducated blacks into the economy, where they would end up as menial laborers picking cotton, or have to go back into slavery just to survive. Mm-hmm. He made sure they were apprenticed to, one of them became apprenticed to a carriage maker, another to a blacksmith, another was involved in bricklaying, so that they would be self-sufficient, able to support themselves and their family. And that's part of General Lee's values. In fact, after the Civil War, he was in Baltimore, and his former slaves wanted to meet with him. And they did in the tent, and they wouldn't allow any media in. But there was a lot of crying and hugging going on, according to all reports. So he was not an evil slave master. And he also opposed secession. He thought that was a very bad idea. Of course, he was proven right there. But he went with Virginia. And this is another problem that you find with people today. You can look at history one of two ways. You can look at it from the present toward the past and impose today's values on people who've been dead 150 years, which I think is wrong. Or you can look at it the way people looked at it in that day, from the present to the future, which is how people live. And you get a very different interpretation when you do that. But anyway, so much for my philosophy of history.
No, I mean, these are the kind of little details that are so forgotten or so unlearned or so obscure that it presents another part of the debate or argument that I think sadly is not really even happening that should happen. So, you're giving us a lot of tips here that, if we get into these kinds of discussions with friends, family, or, in the parking lot at the grocery store, if we're confronted, I mean, you can impart some things that I think would be not only charming, but valuable. So, we appreciate the work that you have done all of these years and in your career, and certainly as an author. But when it comes to your book from last year, Bust Hell Wide Open, The Life of Nathan Bedford Forrest, here's a man that went from really kind of nothing. I mean, how is it that he ended up becoming, at the age of 14, the head of a family? Can you tell us that?
Well, Forrest is a uniquely American story. He grew up in poverty, dire poverty. I mean, his whole house was 960 square feet. The average American house today is probably about 1,700. But it was one room, and there were 10 people living in it. And you could look through the logs, and you could see little cracks and look outside. And it was not a pleasant thing. He was very broke, and yet by the time the Civil War started, he was worth. He admitted being worth $1.5 million, which would be $34 million in today's money. Mm-hmm. And I've looked at some of the records, and I think he was lowballing it. He was worth more than that. And this was a first grade dropout. He never could read and write properly. Yet he rose from private to lieutenant general in 4 years. He was the only one in the war to do that. And in the process, he personally killed 30 Yankees in one-on-one combat. He got a thrill out of fighting. He also killed a gunfighter. He killed 2 Confederates. Running away when he was your commander was a bad idea. And he also killed a wife beater. The man tried to cut him with a knife, and Forrest hit him in the head with an axe. So he was a man to step aside for. He was a big man. He was about 6'2", at a time when the average American was about 5'7". The average Union soldier in the war, someone recently determined, weighed about 143 pounds. He was about 210. Wow. And he was a fierce warrior. And he had a natural brilliance on the battlefield, although he had no military education whatsoever. He called flank. When he wanted to take them in the flank early in the war, he would say, take them in both ends. But like Bright's Crossroads, he had 3,200 men. The Yankees had over 13,000. He basically destroyed the Union Army there. It took them 10 days to get from Memphis to Bright's Crossroads. It took them 2.5 to get back. But they weren't encumbered by things like wagons and ambulances and artillery and caissons. They lost all those. At Okolona, the Yankees had 7,000 men. He had 2,500. But 600 of his men did not have weapons. He nevertheless smashed the Union Army, chased it 11 miles, took all their cannons. And he did this again and again and again. Lawrence Plantation comes to mind. He was outnumbered 4-1. No Yankees escaped. He was just, say, a force of nature and a bit of a genius. And General Sherman said he was the greatest cavalryman America ever produced. In fact, he almost killed General Sherman personally at Battle of Fallen Timbers. They came within a few feet of each other, and Sherman later told his veterans at a reunion, said, had Forrest not emptied his revolver breaking through our lines, my career would have ended then and there. So he was pretty unique.
Professor, there was a time back then, too, and it's very hard for people today to put themselves back in time and history, even if they do read it or study it, that law enforcement then or conflict back then is anything but it is today. So when you say that, he kind of took some of the law into his own hands, that's what people did back then, too, was it not?
It was. He was perfectly capable of doing that. He wouldn't. He believed in law and order, but if he became angry, he would settle matters on his own.
A lot of us try to today.
And he had a fierce temper, and he underwent a glandular surge when he was angry. The blood would go to his face. It would literally swell, turn the color of heated bronze. And if his wife wasn't there, you would have a fight on your hands at that point. And his temper was very quick. I mean, a lot of people have a hard time working themselves up into a rage. With Forrest, it was like flipping on a light switch.
Uh-huh.
He could go from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, But yet, he was also very kind. He went broke helping destitute soldiers. He was very generous. He made major contributions to a black church there on Beale Street in Memphis. So he was a very complex personality. And his attitude toward black people changed. He when he was young, slavery was the law of the land back then. He looked upon them as property. But later he changed. He even advocated allowing blacks to vote. And I think his conversion to Christianity was a major factor in that. But he even spoke to a civil rights organization, the Poll Bearers. Got a lot of criticism from former Confederates for doing that. So we'll say he was a very complex personality.
Professor, how did he make his money? I mean, you spoke of his wealth at some point. Where did that wealth come from?
Oh, you name it. Slave trading was part of it, but also cattle and horses. He got involved in that. He had a stage line. He had a brick manufacturing plant, and he was heavy into land speculation. So he had money from all different directions, and he was, like I say, worth a lot of money. And they even elected him to the, ironically enough, the city council in Memphis. It's now trying to tear down his statue. And he was a very good civil servant. He headed the finance committee because he understood money.
Mm-hmm.
And when they, one of the councilmen, kind of like today's politician, wanted to condemn a bridge, Forrest inspected the bridge and said it's not that bad, it can be repaired, the whole thing doesn't have to be replaced. And the councilman admitted, well, he had a colleague who wanted to get that contract, and there would be a kickback if they did it. So let's condemn the whole bridge, and it almost cost him his life. Forrest threatened to throw him in the Mississippi River, and if he ever brought up anything like that in his presence again, he would. And the thing about it, people say, "Oh, I'm going to kill you all the time." They're kidding. When Forrest didn't kid about that. When Forrest threatened to kill you, you needed to take it seriously.
I mean, this stuff isn't funny, but it is kind of funny. I mean, it's charming. I mean, I don't know how else to necessarily put it. What happened to his brothers and sisters?
Oh, he had a twin sister and had two other sisters. They died of disease during the pre-war period. Two of his brothers died in war. One died of a disease. One was shot in the neck by Yankee, his favorite brother, and died in his arms. And Forrest just went nuts when that happened. He got on his horse and attacked the Yankees one-on-one. He didn't wait for his men. He had 3 Yankees down before the rest of the cavalry could arrive. He killed 5 Yankees that day and wounded several others. One of his brothers was crippled in the Mexican War. And it may be a good thing for the United States that he was, because he was very much like Bedford. And just frankly, if we'd had a few more Bedford Forrests, we would have 2 different countries today.
Interesting.
He did come close to winning the war for the South. But John Nathaniel, he only walked on crutches. And during the war, he was the only one of the brothers that didn't fight for the Confederacy. But a Union petty officer from the gunboat Carondelet and several of his men went to see Forrest's mother, who lived in Memphis, which was, of course, occupied by the Yankees. And they told her, in no uncertain terms, what trash she was, what trash her sons were, and were vulgar and obscene, and really upset Forrest's mother. So she went and told John about it. Well, a few days later, the same bunch came and decided to tell John what trash he was. Well, he didn't take it very well. And he told them they would desist and shut up, or he would break these crutches over their heads. Well, they didn't. So he got up to hit them with the crutches. And he drew back with one crutch, and one of the sailors kicked the other crutch out from under him. And they were laughing at him because, crippled man fumbling for his crutches. Problem is, he wasn't fumbling for his crutches. He was fumbling for his derringer. And they didn't realize it until it was too late. He shot the chief petty officer, who was in a coma for 2 weeks and almost died. Took him months to recover. So they threw John in a cell there in the gunboat, in chains, solitary confinement, bread and water type diet. And Forrest's mother wrote Bedford and told him what had gone on. And Bedford wrote the Union commander in Memphis and told him that he had some choices here. He could give his brother a fair trial and a speedy one, or he could release him, or he could wish he had. And the threat was very clear, because Forrest was taking a lot more prisoners than And the Yankees were.
Yes.
And they released him. They set him loose. And then later they did have a trial. But the tribunal was made up of union officers who did not think kicking crutches out from disabled war heroes was at all funny. So they released John, declared him innocent. He stayed there in Memphis till his death. Anyway, the Forest Boys were a pretty interesting group.
I guess. Now, Professor, how did this? Where did you come across these documents and this research? And what drew you to this?
Well, tell the honest truth, I grew up in a family. I was 12 years old before I found out Robert E. Lee was not part of the Trinity.
Okay.
I ran across a quote. Robert E. Lee did a newspaper interview, and a reporter asked him who was the best general in the Civil War. And General Lee responded, "It was a man I have never met. His name is Forrest." And I said, "Wow." And then I read a book on him, and then I read another one, and I came across a story that reminded me of me. He was definitely not a Christian for most of his life, but he had sense enough to know he wanted to marry a Christian girl. And he met Mary Montgomery, who, in researching this book, you always have surprises. I admire her more than anybody I ran across. She was a Christian. He proposed to her on their third meeting. She accepted on the fourth. But in those days, you had to have Daddy's permission. Her father was dead, but her guardian was the Reverend Cowan. And he was not at all excited about having Bedford Forrest in the family. And they argued about it. And finally, the preacher said, "Bedford, you fight. You're an extrovert. You carouse. You gamble." He was a heck of a gambler. "You even get in gunfights. And you're very profane. Mary is a sweet, demure, introverted Christian girl, and you're not a Christian at all. You have nothing in common with her. Why do you want to marry her?" And Bedford replied, "I don't want to marry anybody like me. I want to marry a Christian girl." And they were married and very happy, although there was some stress in their life over
I would think.
Well, he was a great gambler. He won the modern equivalent of $50,000 on 3 different occasions I can document in a single night. And one of them, he won over $100,000 in today's money. And Mary didn't like that at all. She didn't care about money. And the last time he had signed a note for $2,500, which is like $50,000 today. And the man he signed the note with defaulted, and it fell to Forrest. He had to pay this money. But it was after the war, and he only had $10 because he lost his fortune when the South lost the war. And he decided he'd go out and win it playing poker. And he turned to his wife and said, "Pray for my success." And she said, "I most certainly will not. So I will be on my knees with my Bible in my hand the whole evening, praying for your eternal salvation."
Which was one of the same.
Well, he went out and won $2,500 that night from $10. And when he got the required amount, he packed up his money and was preparing to leave. Well, the other gamblers, of course, wanted a chance to win their money back, so they tried to talk him out of it. And he said, "No, I have a woman at home in a rocking chair waiting for me. I'm going home to her now, and I will spend the rest of my life next to her, and I will never gamble again."
Wow.
He never did.
Well, Professor, you've told a remarkable story here, and you've done some remarkable work here with this history, and it is really quite applicable that we know where we were and how we got to where we are today, and why your story about Nathan Bedford Forrest and in the title of Bust Hell Wide Open is so important to us, because, I mean, we had the Battle of Fort Pillow. We didn't get to the point where he was a Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, but he later, as you gracefully said, that he later denounced all of that and his generosity to his fellow men, regardless of their color. But it tells an interesting story of Tennessee, too, doesn't it?
It does. And you got to remember, organizations change over time. 1865 was the year the Klan was formed. It was also the year the Democratic Party changed from the party of slavery to the party of white supremacy. You may be a Democrat, I don't know, but I'm sure you know some. I doubt if any of them are Democrats because they support slavery.
Exactly.
The organization has changed over time. The Klan deteriorated over time. It started out more or less as a vigilante organization at a time when law and order in the South had broken down. Matter of fact, it's rather interesting. Of the founders of the Klan, 50% of them were lawyers.
Wow.
And it was founded in a judge's chamber in Pulaski, Tennessee. The judge was not present, but his son was. He was an attorney. And after it deteriorated and the white trash elements were taking over, Forrest ordered it disbanded. And the Klan we know today really had its origins in the movie Birth of a Nation, made in 1915. And they pirated the name of the old organization. And if they hadn't done that, I think we'd look at the Ku Klux Klan entirely differently today. But
well, Professor, our time is short, and I want you to come back. Our time with you is not nearly enough, I'm learning, but thank you very, very much for your good work, for authoring all the things that we necessarily need to go read, and your time with doing that. So thank you, Professor Mitcham, and please come back.
Certainly. Anytime you say, just give me a call.
All right, thank you. There's more coming your way, ladies and gentlemen. Stay with us.
You're listening to Red Nation Rising Radio, the new dominant force in conservative Internet talk radio.